Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barry Louise Switson, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned? Welcome to the segment on tools for effective communication. And with me is Nadine Bell. Nadine, what can we do to deliver helpful feedback from individuals?
Our feedback, we would do well to deliver in a timely fashion.
Meaning?
When something has happened, to give feedback as soon as you can to that event, instead of saving it up for 6 months and then telling the person you really didn't like what they did. By that time, both of you have forgotten many of the details, and it's really important to have those details in a time when memories are fresh.
All right, let's just take something happened to the individual that they were not happy with. The individual that it affected was so unhappy that maybe they couldn't effectively communicate because they were so upset and so angry that they felt that if there was a time delay, they would diffuse it and it wouldn't be as irritating, blown out of proportion. Is there a way to shorten that time span to like the present, as you suggested?
Well, I think your point is very well taken, Barry, that just spouting off in the moment is not a good idea. You want time to reflect through and see all the points of view on this, calm yourself down. I was saying to give feedback in a timely fashion, meaning not wait 6 months or a year and then throw it in on top of other things. But if you're going to take a day or two or a week or two to sort all these things out and then sit down calmly and give feedback in the other effective ways that we'll talk about, I think that's very reasonable.
Oh, okay. Well, what other ways are there to do this?
You want to talk about the behavior, not the person.
Meaning?
You were late today.
Okay.
Not you don't care about this place because you're always coming in late. I mean, that's a big jump. We know objectively you were late, and you've been late 4 times. All right, so what does that mean? What are we to get from this? It is a concern here, and let's talk about that. So you talk about the behavior of the person.
You use the word you. Okay, when I say something to somebody, I try not to say that individual in any way, shape, or form, whether by name or you. I always kind of use the we, the broad base, so that a person doesn't have the finger pointing at them. Is that good or is that bad?
Well, now you touch a point, and I'm going to take it a little away from giving feedback.
Okay.
One of the things that you want to take a look at is there are different ways of saying sentences. If you start with it, it is a situation that we have to give some attention to. It puts it way out there someplace. There's no ownership. Unless you're very careful about the way you say you, it can be finger pointing. So you want to think about how you language that. If you start every sentence with I, it's very focused on yourself and doesn't include the other person. One of the best ways to say things that is inclusive is, I notice that you have been late 3 times this week. That's an I-thou statement that is based on my experience talking to you and your experience. And that is probably one of the safest ways to have the interaction.
Because I know it's very difficult sometimes when you're having a conversation with somebody. I don't want to point the finger, but boy, I'd like to put a sledgehammer to them. But I don't want them to be defensive when we're having a conversation on something that's of utmost importance. And so I have sometimes difficulties in how to finesse it.
So then you start with, I feel, and you put a word in there, stressed, when you come late for our meetings.
Okay.
Right. So then you're saying something about your experience in the situation and letting them know the effect that it's having on you. And you're putting both of you into the situation.
So it's 50-50 for the, not so much the blame, but 50-50 for the experience. Okay.
There's a shared experience here. And oftentimes people don't realize that they're having an effect on other people. And so it's very important that we deliver the message on that.
Because I find it very interesting. I was saying to somebody one time, I said, well, I feel this way. And they said, it's wrong. I said, how can you argue? It's my feeling. How can you tell me my feeling is wrong?
And I want you to know there are a lot of people like that who go around telling other people how they should feel. You are absolutely right. No one is a greater authority on your feelings than you are. Nor can anyone tell us that we shouldn't be feeling that way. Now, we could talk about how to approach life and deal with feelings in a different way, but this segment is on communication tools. And so I think that if people will refrain from telling one another how they feel or ought to feel, both parties will be served well.
Of course, then again, sometimes you want to say, don't be depressed, be happy. As the song goes, Bob Marley, be happy, smile, which is the greatest thing in the world.
Smiles are very contagious. You ought to try it from time to time. Just go out there and smile at somebody and see what happens. It's really quite fun. In addition to in a timely fashion,
right,
and not attacking the person, but the behavior, you would do well to check in with the individual and find out what is their observation of the situation. Sometimes we find that the two parties have very different experiences, and it's helpful to know what their experience of the situation is before sharing ours. So asking a question, you know, we had a situation here at the last meeting, what did you notice, what did you experience here? May I tell you how I experienced you at that meeting? Asking for permission to deliver feedback is a nice way of opening the door without just jumping in on somebody and giving it to them whether they're ready for it or not.
Oh, that sounds like a great idea. What makes feedback non-helpful?
When it's the opposite of things that we were talking about, when it's not given in a timely fashion, when it's piled one on top of another. You did this, and you did this, and you did this, and you did yet the other thing, and it's just too much for anybody to handle all of that at one time. When it's not clear and concise, it's important that we give feedback that is very specific so that somebody can understand what it is that we're saying and can respond to it.
Because moving on, I remember a situation some time ago where I come up with answers and people get very upset with me. And I remember I had called you and we were talking about it because it really upset me. Something that seemed so obvious to me. I was talking to a woman and she was saying, oh, she has to lug this piece of luggage around to this showroom or this sales meeting, and she's complaining and it was really tough for her. I said very nonchalantly, well, why don't you use a luggage rack? And she jumped all over me. And she said, you always have the answer. And to me, it was the most obvious thing in the world.
Well, there are a couple things here. A, you're right. It is very obvious to people who are not emotionally involved in it. Okay. So it's easier for us on the outside. Two, some of us think at 75 miles per hour, while others think at 45 or 33 and a third. And so those of us who are at 75 are way ahead and they're not ready for that. So one of the things that I found to be very effective is to ask people questions so that they come up with the discovery that I've got in my head. It's not manipulation, but gives them time to do it. In other words, so Barry, what have you tried to do in the meanwhile, pulling all this stuff around? And then she would answer, if she were you, for example. And have you given any thought to any other way that you might approach it? Or are there other situations where you've had to carry a lot of stuff around and you found something that worked? So you help them build the bridge.
But sometimes when you're in New York, I guess, or anywhere, you don't have the time to build the bridge.
Well, then you do what you do and
suffer the consequences.
Suffer the consequences, right.
What other tools would you like to share with us?
In terms of feedback or communication in general?
Both.
Please remember that we take in information in three different ways. There is the person who takes things in visually, like my husband. He will go to the library and become an instant authority on anything. When we got our first computer, he handed me a spiral 3-ring notebook that was this thick and said, here, now you can learn how to run the computer. And I looked at the man as if he was crazy. There was no way I was going to sit down with that. That's not the way I learn. Another group of us learn by auditory means. We'll go into a lecture, not take a note, be able to remember everything that was said, and that is our primary channel. I don't happen to be one of those people either.
Lucky them.
If I get lost and I stop in a gas station to ask for directions, Before I hit the door, I have forgotten what the man has said if I haven't written it down.
I'm the same way, for whatever reason.
So those of people like you and I may be kinesthetic. And we roll up our sleeves and dive in and learn how to do it OJT, on-the-job training. That's how I learned my computer. I put my fingers on the keys. I had Seymour sitting next to me, and I learned as I did. That way, I remembered what I did. Now, the ways to get cues about what style people have in learning, and knowing that learning style is important in terms of our communication. So the way to get cues is, in terms of your visual person, he'll say to you or she'll say to you, I see what you mean. They'll use visual words.
Okay.
The auditory person will say, I hear what you're saying. I got it. I hear it clearly. The kinesthetic person is more likely to say, I feel you're right. So listen to the people around you,
Right.
and then gauge what you're saying to match their style. If you know it's an auditory person, give auditory examples for them to help them understand what it is you're saying. If you know it's a visual person, then make your examples visual. And if it's kinesthetic, then have them imagine doing thus and so, or experiencing such and so, and they'll be with you much more easily. Now, when you're working with a group of people, and that's fine when you're talking about a coworker, a spouse, a child, a neighbor, or whatever, but when you're working with a group of people, be sure to use all three. Because in your group, you will have visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And it's really important that everybody feel included.
A lot to remember.
It is a lot to remember, so I suggest that people do it one bite at a time. Pick one thing. And I would urge everybody to start with the self-talk.
The self-talk?
The self-talk. Tune in on what you're saying to yourself. And if you're saying a lot of negative things, ask yourself true, false, or I don't know. And then keep track of how many things that you're saying that are negative are things that really you don't know. At best you don't know, and at worst are really false. And then take a look at how you're creating your reality. If you're telling yourself you should, you must, you ought, remember that's masturbation, you want to get rid of it. You don't need any of that should, must, or ought. And substitute other things. I will.
I can.
I can. That's really terrific. I need this, that, or the other thing is very different than I want. Need is very dependent. You need to breathe, and you need water. You do not need the mink coat in the same way. Okay? So be careful about what what you say. I'll try is the worst. If anybody says to you, I'll try, you can count on the fact that they're likely not to be there. I'll try is a backdoor out. So ask people to relanguage, or be careful with yourself when you're saying things. Drop try from your vocabulary and say, I will. And notice the difference that you experience when you say, well, I'll try to get there, to, I will be there. Sounds real different.
My favorite is, well, I've done my best. And you know whatever it is not right. And they say, but I've tried my best. And you want to go say, try again, because the best could be even better.
Well, that's really interesting, because when we were growing up, we had the saying, good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better best. Now, we were celebrated for our accomplishments. That was a very wonderful thing, and I think that's missing a lot in life today. We need to take a look at what it is we've done that we can celebrate, and then push just a little bit more to achieve the next step. That's growth. That's not pressure.
I like
That's
growth.
just moving a little bit beyond where we are.
I think that's exciting to grow. A lot of people don't think so. But going back to stopping and asking questions, how come men don't ask questions? Is it part of their ego that they can't ask a question? Or they don't know, they don't want to admit that they don't know something?
Have you asked men that?
That's
I'm
a good
not
question.
Again, we can't do stereotypes because there are some men who do, but they're less likely to ask questions. And it depends on the author you read in terms of what the reason is. So that's not one that I feel qualified to answer. I just know that it's frustrating to women that men won't ask questions for directions.
I just want to share something with you and the audience, and that I went to a lecture one time, and this woman was talking about how come productivity during World War II increased because women were doing the job that the men were used to doing when they went off to war. All right, this apparently is a true fact.
It is a true fact.
I hope I don't get it screwed up. And the reason the productivity increased was because women asked questions.
Well, it's really interesting you would say that, because many, many years ago, I had a boss who said he gives the most responsibility to the people who ask the most questions. And he went on to explain that was because he knew he wouldn't get into trouble based upon what somebody that he was supervising did. Because if they were going to ask questions, then he would be able to be on top of things. I've never forgotten that. It really has had a serious impact on me. In fact, there have been two bosses. The other boss that I had said she gave roses to the living. She could never understand why people sent these magnificent funeral arrangements to people they barely spoke to while they were alive. So she made a point of finding things that people did well and acknowledging them for that.
That's beautiful.
It's really quite a delicious thing to work for a boss like that.
I'd say so.
And I've taken a page out of her book. Whenever I'm in a restaurant, whenever I'm in a store, whenever I'm getting service, on the phone, any place, I not only tell the people that give it to me, I ask for their supervisors, and I let them know how effective it was and how much I appreciate it.
That's really great. People like to be patted on the back.
And we get so little.
Exactly.
So little. So if each of us were to do this once in the next week, just once, I think there would be a shift ever so slightly that would become contagious, and others would be willing to do it, and eventually we'll be saying positive things to one another instead of looking for the awful things.
Especially living here in New York. There's I mean, you get stuck in a traffic jam, you get stuck on the subway. I meet so many interesting people when it's least expected by saying something.
Absolutely.
And it's really a riot. Of course, I'll come up with a sarcastic comment like, oh, I was enjoying this bus ride so much I forgot to get off. You know, the passengers started laughing. I mean, it's just bringing a little joy to people's life by communicating.
Which people really appreciate.
What else would you like to add for our audience?
Ask for what you want. I was delivering a workshop a number of years ago, and I asked people in the workshop to make a request to somebody. People find it very difficult to make requests.
Because?
They don't want to feel dependent on people. They don't know how. They might not. They fear rejection for all kinds of reasons. They weren't allowed to do it when they were growing up. There's just lots of reasons why people won't do it. And I think that it's important to learn to do things that we're not so comfortable with. So I gave them an opportunity to ask. And when I asked people what they asked for, somebody said, I asked for a massage. And I heard the room go, oh. And I said, did you get it? And she said, yes. And I looked at the group and I said, you could have asked for a massage. You're not going to get what you don't ask for.
Because nobody can read your mind.
Absolutely. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get what you ask for if you ask for something. But you stand a much better chance of getting it if you ask for it. So ask for what you want.
I like that. Unfortunately, we've got to close. And thank you so much for joining me tonight. And thank you also. I hope you ask for what you want. Don't touch that dial. The Women's Connection continues. Welcome. On this segment, I've got Dr. Loretta Mears, who is a chiropractic doctor and a clinical certified nutritionist. And we're going to talk about carbohydrates in this segment. Doctor, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Barry.
One of the articles I was reading that you wrote, you were talking about eliminating wheat in the diet because it has something to do with sugar. And I was a little confused because when I looked at my cereal and all the grains it has, There was nowhere did it mention anything about sugar. So I'm a little confused. Would you clarify this for me?
Actually, I'm not sure that wheat, I necessarily equate wheat with sugar. I think that there are two questions here. One is, this society is one in which sugar is in almost everything. Unless you make a concerted effort, you're going to eat some sugar in your diet. If you eat out in restaurants or if you buy packaged foods in the regular supermarket. The added sugar has, in addition to the fact that most of the prepared foods that we buy are made with white flour, white rice, or white sugar. And those products, because the bran and the natural oils and the natural nutrients have been taken out, and synthetic vitamins have been added in, which is what enriched means. We usually think enriched means, oh, they've added more to it. Actually, what they've done is taken out the natural vitamins and oils that were there, because it would make the food spoil faster, and added synthetic vitamins so that most breads and cakes and pastries have a tremendously long shelf life, whereas if it were a whole wheat food, it would spoil a lot faster. Indeed, you want your food to spoil fast because it means it's filled with nutrients that your body can use much better.
Well, that's a good way to look at things. Never thought about it that way.
It's true. It's interesting. One of the ways I try to convince people that, my patients, that white rice and white flour and white sugar aren't good for them is that if you put out, for lab mice, if you put out whole wheat grain white flour, the mouse will go for the whole wheat right away. They only eat the white rice and the white sugar after all the whole wheat and the brown rice is gone.
They're very picky.
They're very smart.
They're very smart. And they're very healthy.
We should be so smart. People have become used to the texture of refined carbohydrates over processed foods, and sometimes it takes a real adaptation period to get used to brown rice and the whole grains. The whole grains are important because the bran around the outside of it, the added fiber, makes it easier for your body to slow down the process of digestion, so that all those foods which have natural sugars in them are broken down more slowly. So the blood sugar reaction that you usually get, that rush that you get when you eat a donut, that high rise and then the crash down, doesn't happen usually when you eat complex carbohydrates, which are brown foods. So I say you want to go for brown foods and avoid white foods. When you are speaking of carbohydrates, you really are talking about sugar, whether you're talking about refined sugar or the sugars, the natural sugars that complex carbohydrates are broken down into, because they all have them. There's a big push now on high protein diets and avoiding carbohydrates because they make you gain weight. I do think that protein is an important part of any healthy nutritional plan, but so are carbohydrates. The real issue is the kind of carbohydrates. Now, wheat is one of the problems I think that we have. Most of us live on pasta and sandwiches, toast, English muffins, bagels. And
making me hungry.
the problem with that much wheat in a diet is that it's a fairly new grain. It's been around for thousands of years, but we've been around even longer than that. And indeed, there's a particular allergy to wheat gluten that makes it hard for some people to digest it. There are theories now that seem to suggest that a lot of people, not all, but that a lot of people would be better off if they limited their wheat intake. Not because of sugar, but because the grain itself is difficult for us not to digest, but to assimilate properly.
Oh, how interesting. Is there any one type of grain to eat that's better than another? If you want to bake
a variety
something?
Is always the best way to go. Okay. If you're baking bread, there are lots of grains available. There are flours in the health food stores that are made with different varieties of whole grains. But usually you can go into any decent health food store, and most supermarkets now have whole grain breads made with whole wheat made with oats, or spelt bread or brown rice bread in different combinations. Anything that is not refined, that allows you variety, is actually a very good alternative. You don't want to be stuck in a rut when it comes to nutrition. Your body needs lots of different alternatives.
I certainly give it a lot of alternatives. Unfortunately, too much sugar, that's the problem.
Yeah. Sugar becomes a way we get ourselves started in the morning because we don't get enough sleep.
Mm-hmm.
We use sugar and coffee to get ourselves started in the morning. And then around 10 o'clock, 10:30 or 11 o'clock, when we start to fade and it's not time for lunch yet, we know that more sugar or more coffee will get us started again. And so we end up on this roller coaster ride of either caffeine and sugar, because if you're drinking colas, you're also getting caffeine and sugar. And it's a way to try and avoid those energy lows that come from having too much sugar intake. What I advise people to do is to try to eat something for breakfast, even if it's a decent protein drink, or some Americans tend to think that breakfast has to be breakfast foods. And the rest of the world, breakfast is what was left over from dinner. And I have actually gotten a lot of my patients to eat dinner for breakfast, because indeed it's a balanced way of getting some protein and some complex carbohydrates in. But there are also companies preparing really good breakfast foods. Oatmeal is a wonderful whole grain, whole wheatena.
So I guess going back to the Cowboys' days when they were having steak and eggs.
That's exactly right.
That was a very healthy breakfast.
Their steak was a little different from the one we have now. It was much less
chemical
and loaded in fat. It was actually much leaner than the kinds of meat we get now. Right.
Fascinating. Well, I want to thank you so much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And it's, God, I could talk for hours on this stuff. It's like, of course, I'm not talking, but I mean, it's fascinating to listen to all this stuff. And I thank you for joining us, and I hope you've learned something too. Bye now.